Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Grow Your Path to Wellness. If this is your first time listening, my colleague Amanda and I, we host a new wellness guest every week, and then we release all of our new episodes on Sundays. Amanda is continuing to take time away to do her maternity leave, take care of her new little one. So it's been myself hosting our guests for the time being, but she will be back with us soon. Or not rushing her time. I think she still has about another month or so, but we're so excited for her and Tommy, her husband. He's part of our men's mental health series typically, but he is on his own paternity leave. So it's Will and I today, but both of them will be back soon. So also, everybody, make sure you subscribe, like, follow, leave us feedback, so that way you can be notified of any new episodes as well. Last week, I hosted another return guest. We had Lisa Schaefer, and we covered our second to last chakra in our trauma and chakra healing series. It's a mouthful for me every single time. So we covered all things third eye chakra. But this week, I have Will Mills returning, and we're going to continue. We had a little delay. We had a little break in our men's mental health with just life nowadays, but Will's back with us to talk on the topic with me since Tommy is out on his own maternity leave. So welcome back, Will. Thank you for joining me again.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I love to chat with you, and of course we're missing Amanda, but I'm grateful to be here with you and to talk these hot topics that are...
Absolutely. This is a good one. I get excited for every episode, but before we jump in, Will, do you mind giving those who didn't catch your last episode just like a brief intro about you and how you're involved in the area of wellness?
Sure. So I'm Will. I'm an LPC, licensed professional counselor based in New Jersey. I also am a co-owner and life coach at Mental Wealth Coach. It's actually launching tomorrow, November 1st, and that link is... well, not link. The URL is mentalwealthcoaching.org. You can follow us on Instagram at Mental Wealth Coaching LLC, as well as on TikTok. I'm on TikTok and Instagram as well. Counselor Will on TikTok, counselor.will on Instagram. At Mental Wealth Coaching, we specialize in various services for wellness, including intuitive eating, ADHD, autism, and anxiety coaching, body positivity, body neutrality, body acceptance, self-help coaching, and parenting coaching, as well as men's coaching, which kind of brings us to what we're talking about today, which is toxic masculinity.
Yes. Oh, we're so excited for you. The things, the teasers and things you've been posting about your guys' site launching and having the wait list and getting ready to start seeing people. So I'm super excited for you.
Yeah, it's been a whirlwind. I never thought of myself as like I feel like we all get in this field for very personal reasons of wanting to help others and be in the helping professions. And I never personally thought of myself as a business owner. I was always like, I'm going to work at nonprofits and I'm going to work in group homes and residentials. And I don't know, like you meet people and worlds collide and paths and trajectories change and you're kind of inspired, and it's just been a great experience. But I'll talk all day about my partners and co-owners who are amazing, and I'm super excited, and I'm glad that it's being so well received, because life coaching isn't necessarily the most positively thought of industry in terms of wellness, but since we are actually like clinicians and therapists, I think it's going to be impact in changing how people view life coaching, and maybe hopefully what it takes to be a life coach that's held in high regard.
Yes. Yeah, it's so exciting, and I can't wait to. So yeah, tomorrow it launches. So to go, and I will check it out.
Yes, thank you. It's beautiful. It really came out great.
Okay. So exciting things. And so, yeah, you're correct. Like I remember when Amanda and I's paths crossed, and I think private practice was way out there for me. Like I didn't think that I would end up in it as early as I did. It was one of those things that I'd be like, that would be cool. That would be nice. And then like, here we are, a year in it.
It's just like a fleeting-eyed notion, right? And then it's like, oh, and then what? Like, no, I don't know. I just feel like maybe it's my personal stuff. I never thought of myself as a business owner, but so it's been wild. Yeah.
I love this for you so much.
Thank you.
So yes, like Will said, today we wanted to discuss the topic. It's kind of a hot button issue or topic on, on toxic masculinity. And so, well, we can jump in with what exactly is it and what does it look like?
So toxic masculinity is kind of like it's like a Bogart in Harry Potter, where you're not quite sure what it is at first, but it doesn't feel right, and then all of a sudden it's very apparent, right? And sometimes you have to take a step back and to really receive what's happening to get a bigger look at um, your view, your perspective. So toxic masculinity in essence is a set of attitudes, ways of behaving, a belief system that is stereotypically associated with or expected of men, in terms of having a negative, those behaviors having a negative impact on men as a gender, and society, more importantly society as a whole. Yeah. So it can look like, there's so many different forms of toxic masculinity, especially across, I know we're going to get into this later, but across cultures. It can look like boys being told not to express themselves emotionally, to suck it up, to get up and brush it off, walk it off. It can also be in terms of the way men treat women, how they perceive women to be potentially lesser sex or weaker sex, and the roles that they believe are stereotypically inherent in those, in men, for men and for women. So it can look so different.
Right. And, with us, we're speaking, to our general society. We'll get in, to cultural difference and presentation and considerations in a minute. But I think, yeah, it's like the word that comes to my mind when we think of toxic masculinity is like expectations that have been present in our society forever, for as long as I can, ever remember. And it's all of those, it's just expectations on men, whether it's for their emotions, their actions, and that, yeah, impacts the people around them if we don't see this and call it out and have that awareness.
And it's embedded in our capitalistic and patriarchal culture, especially since literally the beginning of the founding of this nation with different, like going hundreds and hundreds of years back. People like, I think it was John Locke who wrote, basically was the nature of man was to be violent and to be a hunter and to be aggressive. So that's what being a man looks like. We're not allowed to be victims. We're violent. We're aggressive. We suppress our emotions. Um, we initiate everything we can't. My cousin got engaged and he was proposed to by his partner, who is a woman, and he's very much a masculine, stereotypically masculine male. He's got a full beard. Um, he works for a union. He's a laborer. He's very, yes, like blue collar. And he was proposed to by his fiance, and it was a whole big deal in my family. And I was like, that's freaking awesome. I think that's so cool. Like, she loves him so much.
I was like, I love that. But
Yeah.
other people who haven't broke through this, and it's, yeah, quite the opposite reaction. I could only imagine.
It shows up in the corporate world as well. Like, men will act as bullies to maintain a competitive advantage. They think that that's how it's very much this athlete mentality, this warrior mentality, so to avoid the perception of losing or failing at all costs. Men don't believe that failure is an opportunity to learn. It's a reason to stop doing something or to give up. So, and the strength comes from, men are perceived strong when they're aggressive. They're not perceived strong when they're empowered in their emotions, or they're able to communicate effectively, or able to be supportive and empathetic. That's not considered strengths for men. And obviously the microaggressions towards women and towards, especially in white patriarchal culture, towards other races.
Right. Yes. So let's get in and dig in a little bit deeper on what are like specific implications for humans and our society as a whole.
Well, the entitlement of men is an epidemic. The entitlement to women's bodies, the entitlement to it shows up not only in crime and action, but also in legislature. And that's, in certain conservative areas where men think they have the autonomy to tell women what to do and what not to do with their bodies. That is, to me, a form of toxic masculinity. You have no idea what it's like to be in this situation, to carry a child, to birth a child, to nurture it within your body, to have it live off of you and grow inside of you, and however that came to be. And so it shows up in so many different ways. Also in suicidal rates amongst men. We're going to talk about this later, but the mask of masculinity, the concept of the tough guys, GUISC, that kills men. They're not able to connect to each other or to their partners. And this is not just in heteronormative relationships. This also happens in queer relationships as well. But it just looks the toxic masculinity just looks a little different. But yeah, infidelity, insecurity, we could go on all day about how it impacts the safety of women, children. But for me, a huge point is the suicide rates among young men, especially young men in their late teens to early 20s, are and our life expectancy is much shorter. And I'm keen to believe that that has something to do with our ability to heal and deal with the things that happen to us, and to communicate with the people we love around us.
Yes, and very often the people around us, and again, I'm female, but the being on the female end of things, even those people around us and our culture, those people align with the belief and the concepts and the values of toxic masculinity. And it's hard for, I think, anyone on both sides when we're doing this work, we're healing and we're dealing, but then the people around us, we can't do that for them. So then there's that implication, on when I start healing, how that is impacting how I'm showing up in those relationships and how I'm being perceived. And I say all the time, I'm not responsible for other people's perceptions of me, but it is impactful at the same time. People's the slurs or the passive aggressive comments that you get when you start doing your own healing and shifting where you're aligning in those groups.
Yeah, 1,000%. And it separates us where it needs to bring us together, and it a lot of people will talk about, well, why didn't she do or say this? Why didn't this person stick up for themselves? We need to teach men to be less entitled, because we shouldn't even be asking those questions. We should be asking, why did this person feel that it was within their ability or within their right to act or speak in this way, to conduct themselves in this way? Let's explore that and put the onus back on the individual. But since men are only praised or not praised, the only emotions necessarily men are allowed to show are pride and anger. So if it doesn't fall within those two things, then a lot of times belittling women and condescending to women, doing those things, that's a prideful thing for men that they need to unpack and reframe, because it's toxic, it's unsafe, and it's men getting in their own way. They're not in a way, and I'm not talking about in dangerous ways. I'm talking about just in relationships with maybe their sisters, their family members, or coworkers, where you could be building resources and supports for yourselves and valuable, meaningful relationships that are platonic, with women.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And yeah, you're so many different types of relationships. Like I just had a confidentiality. I had a conversation with a client about a situation they encountered in the workspace. And on the same exact concept of the having to have that pride and showing up in the workspace coming across as arrogant, and it's harming not just those relationships, but the overall work culture, the sense of safety for somebody to be able to share ideas, and we're all here for the same purpose, the same goal. Like, can we just be like kind humans? And instead we have this as a part of our culture, a very, very real thing.
Right, because then you have the capitalism, which perpetuates this individualistic notion instead of this collectivist society, where again, you're saying, women don't feel comfortable to share their ideas, to share their successes, to share their fears, whatever it is, which can inevitably and ultimately foster growth and connection and success and all these great things. So it's a hindrance not to just humanity, but in the genders as separate entities, but also as us as a culture, as a society, because we're not able to work together. And even on a more extreme scale, like, people love to throw the psychophobic stuff out there about mental illness, right? Oh, this madman went on a rampage because he's mentally ill, because he's unstable, because he's unhinged. No, it's because he's toxic. He's a toxic male, and he thinks that he's entitled to things like taking people's lives or taking people's safety, which, if he had the ability to express emotions and feel empathy and put himself in other people's shoes, besides men that look exactly like him, come from a similar class standing as him, then maybe we would be safer as a society. Maybe we would be less psychophobic and harmful to the mentally ill community, which are more likely to be victims of violence than to perpetuate it, by far. So I think there's so many, it's so layered and so complicated in how this concept of toxic masculinity just permeates itself like a cancer in our systems and perpetuates this oppression.
Because I always say in our field all the time, each human is a walking system. We're part of so many different systems in our life. Our personal relationships, how we show up and treat other people walking through the grocery store. Yes. Like, it's everywhere. It is everywhere, unfortunately.
It's the media message. It's so many things that impact us. It's not just like, as therapists, people are always like, what's the why? Why am I like this? And it's like, you could spend all day digging for the why. It's media message, it's people, it's society, it's the area you grew up in, it's the family structure, it's the roles within that family. It's so many things, it's everything, but it doesn't matter where it comes from. It's how are we going to cut it out and heal from it.
Yes, cut it out, replace it with things that are, I use the term healthier, I don't use it very often, but like more functional, like to bring more sense of peace and collective and connection, because we're human. We're wired for connection with one another. And this is really a big barrier in us in connecting with one another of all genders on that spectrum.
Right. And across generations.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned it, but let's unpack even more, but more specifically how it presents toxic masculinity in the media that we consume.
Oh gosh. Yeah, I mean, so advertising, commercials, like that stuff is being a former performer myself. I understand, coming from the acting, world. I understand how we internalize these things that we don't even, and how they're being sold to us, right? So it happens in commercials, it happens in TV shows, and sometimes movies, any images, tabloid magazines. This idea of male dominance as a power, as a tool for control, and as something that's sexy. It's not just sold to men, it's sold to women as well. And where you're living also dictates that. So advertisers are really smart to know their audience and to geographically be like, okay, this household, they're this age, they're there's this type of people living there. So in this area, so that's what I'm going to gear these advertisements for. So if you're in a more metropolitan area, you may not see some things that are as now in 2021 as like unapologetically problematic, right? But when you get into more conservative areas, if you're, and this is especially dangerous for queer children or children who don't necessarily identify with the ideologies of the household that they're being brought up in, um, where they're being fed this information, and then it becomes like, this is what the people around me think about me, which also becomes this dangerous thing. So it can look different. So we have a lot of like, for example, like, oh my God, what are these TV shows with these students dating teachers, like in high school? I know they're being played by 20 somethings, but they're high school students. Like the new Gossip Girl is doing it. They did it 5 years ago with Pretty Little Liars, like glamorizing this grooming of this older predatory male, taking advantage of and that's a form of toxic masculinity, right? Using your power and your role to draw in someone who's vulnerable and who's supposed to feel safe and comfortable and protected by you. So, and there's very few shows that handle that the right way. You don't see like, we're gonna go in and we're gonna take this teacher down and we're gonna remove them. It's not like a major plot point. It's like romanticize the relationship and it's fetishized. So that's just like an extreme example of the toxic masculinity. But you also see it on soap operas and the dichotomies between men and women. We see it in how much people make. It permeates pay culture, how much people make, the difference in the wage gap. Uh, yeah, it's inescapable. It's finally we're starting to see a little shift in terms of advertising. Men are also being sold as sex objects. It's not just women. Now, of course, there's going to be a disparity between the percentage and the types of males that they're using,
Right.
whereas there's going to be a wider variety of women, and it's going to be much more saturating the media. But again, the double standards, hoe culture, shaming, slut shaming, it's that is also prevalent.
Is a big, like, I mean, all of this is big, but that one was one that was in my brain earlier, was the culture around sex, and like how that double standard between men and women and the things that are expected and normalized and
Yes.
promoted for men
Right.
sexual versus women.
Then impacts women's sexual experience and their ability to have orgasms and enjoy themselves sexually. Whereas like it's really, it's not just sad, but it is a atrocious, the percentage difference between the amount of men who climax during sex typically versus the amount of women, when women literally have the ability to climax multiple times. So like toxic masculinity is in everything. It's the selfishness of men, it's the entitlement of men, it's the inability of men to again be perceived as a victim, which then inhibits their ability to become a survivor.
Because that, I mean, that would open the doors for so much healing and dealing, as we said earlier, if I could identify them.
I think it was Chris Brown or somebody who said they lost their virginity at like 8 years old or something like that to a teenage, someone who's, typically experimenting with sex. An 8-year-old should not be having, obviously kids do,
Right.
they're developmentally appropriate things that kids do. That is not it. That is not one of the things. So there's a lot of times where I've been in therapy and I've seen that show up as well, where children I've worked with in residential and other settings have boys didn't realize that. They're like, well, I was aroused, so that means that I was getting a chemical response in my body, so that means that I provided consent. No, you were a child being taken advantage of, and a physiological reaction in your body is not an expressed form of consent. Um, so it's
Later, and that pain, not just pain, that's huge, but also my perception and that connection, those associations with sex, my body, and okay, well, that's what that experience meant, and then that can really draw that line or that path that they're going to follow in that area.
It's going to be a one-sided thing. It's not going to be, it doesn't necessarily have to be consensual and all these other things. Whereas we know as adults with healthy partners that sex is about connection, it's about communication, it's about a bond, it's about pleasure, it's about it's about trust, it's about all these different things. So it really does, like, toxic masculinity is a bunch of bullshit. Like,
I picture like, like you said, we're adults, like sex scenes in the media, or the glamorization of substance use that leads to sex. That I've watched shows, I can't come up with a specific one, or like teens partying,
every party,
drinking, and
yeah.
then the toxic masculinity piece, where it's like the mixture of alcohol and sex, and the male initiating and being entitled to that. You can't give sex, you're intoxicated. But
Right, and we see it with, like, even in celebrity culture. Like, I can think back to when I was like, what was it, 12 years old, when Britney Spears and Justin Timberlake were together, and he put her out there that he took her virginity or all this stuff, and everybody was like, she's a slut, she's a this, she's a that, and now we're all sitting here looking at Justin Timberlake like, that was not your business to be sharing that. That is super toxic. Also, you had more sex partners than her because you weren't a virgin, so why are you slut shaming her and outing her on the radio? Like, first of all, let's be sex positive. Everybody, as long as there's consent, it's safe. Whatever's safe for the people who are consenting adults in the situation, that's for them to determine. And it's not anybody's business but the people who are involved and decide consensually amongst themselves to make it other people's business. So it again goes back to the entitlement. It's the slut shaming, it's the Madonna horror complex, right? That women can be this or that, and there's nothing in between. And toxic masculinity permeates that women are sluts or they're moms. They're
that saying, Will, instantly I feel so grimy when it gets ready to come out of my mouth, but you can't make a hoe into a housewife.
Right. And it goes back how many generations? Why is my grandpa, I can remember saying it when I was like 9 years old about some distant cousin. Why is he going to get the cow when you know what I mean? What is that saying?
That one. Oh, now they're all going to come flooding in, and I'm like, gross.
When one of my aunts told me, like, as I was getting older, I was like, late high school, she was telling me about my cousins and how she was explaining sex to them and how it was like their choice, and she trusted them to make that decision about their bodies because it's their body. And I was just like so mind blown by, like, what? Like, you're not telling them what to do with their parts? Like, that is not okay. Like, this is a bad parenting move. And again, that's toxic masculinity, which is then also influenced by can be influenced by, because we do live in a religious society, religious trauma and toxic spirituality, and they're kind of go hand in hand, right? With women are chaste and that makes them better and more pure and blah, 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 blah. When we know as professionals, like, it's good to have sexual partners. It will help you know not just what you want sexually, but what's important to you in a relationship, in that type of connection. So and it's for people to decide in their own time. I don't know. It's just, we could talk about these systems all day because it's just rampant.
Yeah, the only other thing, and then it's still sticking in my brain, so I guess my brain's just telling me to say it out loud, but I remember being in, like, I think middle school, but when it comes to maybe not literal media, but our use of social media or just technology, like the concept of taking nudes or exchanging those things with a partner, and then that partner having that entitlement, which was the toxic masculinity piece, is where we're at with this. So it was, the males, the boys in the school.
Oh, disproportionately. Yeah.
Images.
And then the girls getting in trouble, getting pulled into the office about, why do you have your boobs out? And everybody's looking at.
If you don't want it out there, don't put it out. Like, and all.
It's everywhere. It's the fact that women can't wear spaghetti straps, because
Right.
men, we positively cannot control ourselves. Like it's like it's it's everywhere. Like if it's hot out, wear a crop top, wear spaghetti straps, like whatever. If you feel comfortable, it doesn't matter if you're 400 pounds or you're 110 pounds. If that's how you feel comfortable in the weather, you should feel safe like that. We shouldn't have women having to police themselves all day long because we can't teach men emotional intelligence and boundaries.
I had my own experience. I think it was like a few weeks ago now, but long story short, I was in a public space. I was going and picking up food for lunch, and I remember, like, after the experience, because I said something to the individual for making me uncomfortable, and I remember afterwards, as I was like going back to my car, I felt that programmed response of, what was I wearing? I was at work, so I wasn't wearing any, like, I felt that. And I was like, it doesn't matter. My logical brain knows, like, it doesn't matter what I'm wearing. You're not entitled to make comments about me or, to make me uncomfortable.
Right, and that's when the needless shame comes in, right? And again, that's part of this toxic masculinity that teaches women to feel shame for their bodies. So it's really not, and a lot of this is what I learned in undergrad in the psychology of women course. So you can't talk about one, like you cannot talk about men without talking about women, and you cannot talk about women without talking about men, because as a human race, up until this point, that's how we've existed, by coexisting, by commingling, by having these relationships. Um, so you can't have one without the other, and it's endless the way toxic masculinity not just impacts men and relationships, but the other genders and society as a whole, like in terms of safety, in terms of how they feel about themselves, on self-worth. And it's great that you've done that work, to like unpack that, but so many people have not. And there's so much, I've talked to so many victims who feel responsible for the things that have happened to them because of toxic masculinity, because of needless guilt and needless shame, which also comes from, toxic spirituality and religious trauma, which I feel like is enmeshed, because where do we get these roles from, right? Where do we get these stereotypical patriarchal ideals from?
Yeah. Our belief system,
Yeah,
those larger things that we were modeled and said that, hey, this is right and this is wrong.
right. Which usually morals and values for most people typically come from religion. So um, there's a lot to unpack in terms of toxicity and masculinity and how that impacts us historically as well.
Yeah, well, I think the next piece is super, super important. So before we run out of time, I want to make sure that we have time I can talk and talk and talk. And like, as we're going, I like something, another whole other area comes up in my mind, and I'm like, okay, nope, I can't. I gotta. Um, but toxic masculinity, cultural humility, the kind of just those cultural differences and belief systems.
So we have our American culture, right, and what that looks like, very red, white, and blue. We know what that looks like here, toxic masculinity. But in Asian cultures, in Latino cultures, and as practitioners and as people who have people from loved ones from other cultures in our lives, we have to humble ourselves and sometimes step back and again gain that larger perspective and see what we're actually looking at here. Is this so with with how we've developed schemas and how we develop these belief systems and these patterns, the way we think, right? It's about how people treat us, how people believe us to be, and the world around us. So we're depending on where you are culturally is going to be differences in what toxic masculinity looks like. Now, in the Latino culture, you have machismo, and how that shows up in the roles in the household. And in some Latin cultures, men physically disciplining, let's say, abusing women, and also in the old school Italian culture, old school Irish culture. So it varies, and that's a normalized behavior as something that's just like in certain households typical, just like saying shut up to your partner, and things like that. In an American
Yeah.
toxic masculinity relationship might be typical, or whatever that looks like. In Asian cultures, it impacts the ability for men to build relationships with their fathers. And now in Asian and Indian cultures, we know we have multiple families oftentimes living in the same house, taking care of each other, raising generations together. So it really is that generational trauma that happens in terms of their ability to connect to their own loved ones and have those meaningful relationships and learn how to express um, themselves. And because when you're not able to do that, that turns into degradation, that can turn into violence, that can turn into, the suppression of emotions and all these other things. And it just looks slightly different. And always, as practitioners, a lot of people talk about cultural competence. It's impossible to know everything about every culture. So sometimes we just have to humble ourselves, listen to the person that we're working with, and learn about what that experience looks like. And then in our own time, do our research, whatever that looks like, whether it's talking to people of similar culture, whether it's getting on the internet. Google is free. Reading, perusing listservs, reading peer-reviewed journals, whatever it is, doing our own due diligence as providers to try to bridge that gap as much as possible, so that the person doesn't feel so exhausted, and the burden of proof, right, doesn't fall on them to explain themselves.
Yeah, nothing wrong with I mean, if you wonder something, or if you don't know, ask for clarification. But then after that interaction, I need to do my own work to better understand this as a whole and how this is, because like in our field, primarily I've only worked within our culture, and I live in a very rural, conservative area.
Yeah.
So, but I know how different, because we have that awareness, that cultural awareness of whenever I have somebody in my office and they're sharing an experience, you can't assume that something is toxic masculinity within that culture. Sometimes it's just like, this is our belief system. It's not necessarily, what are we considering and how are we developing that lens of abuse? And
right, like in Indian cultures, right, the parents are very revered. So it's not unusual for the parents to pick out the partner, to be super involved in the relationship, and especially with the son, like for the oldest son to, it's very like culturally, the opinions of the uh, neighbors and the family and the loved ones are very important. So the wife must be very much approved by the father-in-law and by the son, and be taken under, again, the mother's wing and taught how to do everything just so to take care of the son. Now, we would see that as complete, total toxic masculinity. Like, why does she need to come in here and play Betty Crocker and be like, the
telling
perfect
her,
housewife?
yeah,
Yeah. Why can't she work and do what she wants to do and pursue her if she wants to have children, and that shouldn't be the family's business, and blah. Like, we all have different boundaries based on our cultural and lived experiences. So, but for them, that's very typical. That's normal. That's
like, how does what you're sharing with me impact you? And they'll be like, well, that's what I believe, and and that's how I want to live my life. And then I'm like, okay, I ask that, just ask for that clarification.
because sometimes, like, if you're having, like you're saying, people who are from cross cultures, maybe like they're second generation or third generation or what have you. So maybe they want to do things, quote unquote, the American way, or a way that maybe their partner's Latino and they want to do it that way. You know what I mean? Like, it is like you're saying, what is the inside of you? Is there dissonance? Is there that kind of friction that I don't want to be a part of this? I don't want to perpetuate this. I don't want. And let's unpack that now.
Yeah, because I feel like too, with I just know for myself, I can tell I have those self-awareness and those mindfulness skills. I feel like a physical reaction when I hear these things because so I'm all about like empowerment and growth and not being, oppressed. And you have to be careful that we don't just make that assumption, but asking those questions and really listening and hearing their answer and what it means to them.
Right. And then offering education if they're interested. Like, well, would you like to hear about how that may look different since you've been living here for, and again, the goal of people from other cultures and other backgrounds is not to assimilate to the American way, right? There's this whole concept that we're a melting pot and everybody must be like flavor the soup with with the deliciosity and come together. No, we are a salad where everybody is their own thing and they bring that to the salad to make it more delicious, and it's not individualistic, it's collectivist. So as individuals, we create a beautiful collective that honors each other's and respects each other's differences and acknowledges that in a way that's empowering. So, and I think a lot of times toxic masculinity doesn't allow or afford for us to do that because it polices behavior, um, others, especially, and then bringing back to the cultural competence component, when talking about toxic masculinity, talking about this kind of salad, um, that also applies. What does it look like in those other cultures so that we're not trying to dilute it and make it the same as our American way or whatever, our Midwestern way, our Southern way, our New York way? Because even as Americans, we have right microcosms of different cultures.
Yes, absolutely. Because that brings into my brain what I'm, kind of immersed in is the rural, the Appalachian, way of living, and all of those different conflicts and things that can come up when you have someone that's within that household that that isn't necessarily rejecting or, deconstructing or doesn't fully align with it, but they want to do different things or have this type of experience or have this partner in their life or pursue this educational route, and the things that value and have value to them.
Right. And there's the barriers. Right.
For sure. And that connection with those people and within the culture they live in.
Yeah.
And I know, Will, when you sent the email, I think you had referred to a couple different like resources. I think there was a film and a book that I wanted to make sure that I felt like maybe this would tie in here, like the book or this.
So they're a little, I know we're not supposed to use like things that are from 10 years or older, but sometimes like these things are such pillars, that they're
yes.
And they haven't, like, toxic masculinity has not changed in essence. It's always been what it's been. It's just now we're unpacking it and exploring it and dissecting it and replacing it in all these different ways. So I'll talk about the film first, which is called The Tough Guys, which is Guise, and guys, as many people know, like disguise, mask. So this film is about it's called Tough Guys, Violence, Media, and the Crisis in Masculinity. So it examines the relationship between pop culture imagery and the social construction of the idea of masculinity, this notion of masculinity in the United States. So it looks at all these different films. It looks at, I don't know if it's on Netflix or not, but I feel like it's on Amazon. It's from 1999. So it talks a lot about how we've made this shift at the dawn of the 21st century into this, the tough guys, it kind of feeds into the book. So let me just talk about the book, which is The Mask of Masculinity. And that's newer. Let me see. I have it in my notes here when that came out. 2000, something.
Okay.
So it basically talks about this author. His name is what is the guy's name? Lewis Howes, and he talks about the 9 masks of masculinity, and he outlines them, and they're pretty self-explanatory. The stoic mask,
Okay.
athlete mask, the material mask, the sexual mask, the aggressive mask, the Joker mask, the invincible mask, the know-it-all mask, which I struggle with, and the alpha mask. So these are like the 9 types of toxic dudes, for lack of a better terms, and the types of masks that they put on to present themselves to the world. Very one-dimensional, right? Not super layered, and they all show up in different ways. Like the aggression mask calls for aggression before peace. It prioritizes aggression as a form of strength and a way to be right. You know, might makes right mentality, as opposed to searching for peace and that inner strength, right? That we constantly talk about when we're talking about emotional intelligence and mental health, is inner strength, inner peace, the ability to be vulnerable, right? For example, the most common ones that he talks about in the book are the stoic mask, which I think a certain generation can attribute themselves to that one. Material mask, which we see a lot in this flex culture, right? This pop culture, especially in BIPOC communities, where people are sometimes living beyond their means to stunt on social media and pretend that they have, or not pretend that they have things, but the point is that their power and their strength comes from their materialism. Posting pictures, and I think like Little Bow Wow did this, where he took like a Google image or something and said he was on a private jet, and like then people like literally just Google searched and were like, dude, you first, and then took a picture of the inside of him like out a window, and it clearly wasn't like an airplane. It was like not a jet, a private jet window. It was clearly like a commercial flight, like just so stuff like that. Posing in front of cars on the street that they don't own, going to those car shows, you know what I mean? Like different, it shows up in these different ways. And of course, it's fine to have interests and hobbies and things like that. But when it becomes this all consuming and this thing that you use to hide yourself and to conceal yourself and to build a personality in essence, that's when it becomes problematic and a hindrance. Yeah.
Yeah, and it just when we talk about these things, and it my instinct is to feel like sadness.
Yeah.
It makes me feel sad, and it's like the masks, I feel like they exist for obviously many reasons. So we've touched on many of them today, but it's just so that it's a sense of safety and security.
Right, and sometimes the masks are layered. So you'll have an alpha mask combined with an aggressive mask.
Yeah.
Recipe for disaster,
Mhm.
right? A person who's entitled, who's dominating, and now thinks that their power comes from their ability to overpower. That's a dangerous mindset. Those are dangerous masks to wear, as opposed to doing the work that many women do. And that is not easy to do, to figure out who you are, to figure out what you want, to build that emotional language, to seek clarity and understanding when you don't have that, as opposed to jump to conclusions or draw assumptions based on, previous experiences. So, and it can be dangerous in other ways as well. Like if you're an alpha mask wearer who's an aggressive mask wearer, now we have a dangerous situation if you're a little guy and you're challenging a bigger guy
Right.
because you want to prove yourself and you want to take down the biggest guy at the bar, whatever the toxicity is that's presenting in that moment. So it's sad, it's dangerous, and like I said earlier, it's an epidemic that impacts not just the genders, all of them across the spectrum, and human safety, but society, as our ability to grow, our ability to develop and as you know, we live in this day of internet. We're on TikTok, we're on Instagram, right? Globalization is such a huge thing. We can connect with people all across the world, but when we're not doing our own healing and all this, not taking off these masks, it becomes super dangerous that we have this ability to connect.
Yeah.
And we see that online. We see how that can not just perpetuate in real time, in real person, the aggressiveness, the alphaness, the materialistic, the stoic, but it also, we see it on the internet. We see it continue to perpetuate in ways in 2021 that it couldn't happen in 1995. So as much as we talk about feminism and toxic masculinity and tear down the patriarchy, there are just as many, if not more, people who are continually perpetuating the antithesis of that, and are just working as steadfast and as dedicated as us clinicians, us advocates, us survivors are.
Feel that division just in that, if we look at it in that big picture lens.
Yeah, I posted a video on TikTok once talking about how women, it was like one of those sounds where you do like a lib dub or whatever, and I did it with all the people I went with on the TikTok retreat, all the TikTok therapists, and I had a man and a woman attacking me in the comments saying that this was dangerous because what the TikTok was is saying that why it was a commentary on why we call women weak. Women are not weak.
Yeah.
Do they call female sharks weak? Do they call female tigresses weak? We only in humans do we identify women as being weak, as the only animal in the animal kingdom. And I had people, a man, and they're attacking me, calling me an idiot, a woman there calling me dangerous, saying that I was perpetuating abuse and all these. And I'm like, no, and it's hard to like try to explain in a way that is not coming off as a domineering, controlling, problematic man. So to try to get them to understand, like the issue is in the lack of the understanding of what strength means and what power means and how toxic it is the way we've defined it into this moment. And that's why these abuses continue to happen to women, not because people like me want to change the way women are perceived, because women have higher pain thresholds than men. Their leg muscles are stronger than men. They are able to give birth. Haven't seen a man do that. So there's so many things that define women as strong beyond the fact of them being hurt by men and dealing with that.
Yes. And yes, we both know if I'm gonna make content and put this content out there, we're vulnerable, and we know it's a vulnerable thing to do, to be creators. And obviously we do it because of, I want to foster more of these types of connections in the world, or get this information. It's not therapy, like we say that all the time, but putting this information out there from our lens and in the work that we've done. But not everybody's done that work, or they don't have, we don't all have the same perspective, but sometimes it can get very, you can see the division. So,
and there's some people who want to learn, and there's some people who have a spark of inspiration in that moment, and there are some people who are just committed to misunderstanding you. And at a certain point, we have to remove ourselves from those situations and recognize that, not just within others, but also within ourselves, because I'm guilty of that too, where I am staunch in my opinion and I'm unmovable, and there's nothing that you can say that's going to change my mind, but I still need to be open and receptive and to listen and to hear. But I just wanted to really quickly jump back to the Tough Guys, the movie, which the Tough Guys, the movie basically talks about the two masks, the alpha mask and the aggressive mask. And it just is very not graphic, but it gives you a great physical representation of what a toxic masculinity looks like, and literal examples from, it's a little dated because it's from the 90s. So then the examples are going to be from the 70s, 80s, 90s cinema and TV. So check it out. It's somewhere, if it's not at the very least on YouTube.
I mean, now I don't have any plans on my agenda the rest of the day. So the things that I do I'm watching something or reading something, or usually, so I have to look for it. So if I find which platform it is before Amanda gets this edited and posted, I will have it put in the show notes with it.
Perfect. Yeah, no, it's there's a, and the thing is that we have the mental health stigma, and that's why we're all on TikTok and Instagram too. And that's even more prevalent in the male or he, him identifying culture. There is resistance to get treatment, this resistance to heal, because if I'm healing, that means I'm hurt, and that means something's wrong with me. And to even to even get beyond, to change that perception of there's something wrong with me because something happened to me that changed me, to even get to that point, there's not a lot of emotional intelligence there for the typical man. So, and I hope men don't hate me for this or tear me down for this, but it's just the fact of life, and we got to do better. And if you want some men's coaching, come to me at Mental Wealth Coaching, and I'll be glad to help you out to unpack these systems.
Yes. Well, as always, like you're always welcome back. But thank you for coming back to speak on this topic, and we appreciate it so much. We're, again, since Tommy couldn't be here, but I was like, I think it was good. It worked out great, and I appreciate you coming back and plugging in for us in the men's mental health series.
Yeah, of course, my pleasure. I love y'all and the content you produce, and I think it's so important, everything you're all doing as a team, and I'm just grateful and humbled to ever be invited to come here. It's always my pleasure, and to share my little tidbits that I know. I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, so I always say, even if there's somebody out here and they listen to what we're putting out, even if it's planting a seed for them or sparking hope, sparking something, I've done what I'm setting out to do. So Thank you so much. And as usual, everybody will have the resources that Will gave us. And I don't know if we could have the URL for your website if it comes up tomorrow. Would it still work if we put it in the show notes? We'll put your handles in there. So yes, thank you so much, Will. Everybody, make sure you follow, like, subscribe, so that way you can get notified each new episode that comes out every week. The next couple weeks, I'm actually going to be taking some of my own R&R time. So Amanda's going to pop in temporarily, but I'm going to take a much needed vacation next week. So a couple Sundays I'm going to be down and kind of unplugging, disconnecting for a little bit. But people will get to see Amanda. She's set it up with her partner there, Tommy, and so he's going to care for the little one, and Amanda's just going to pop in for a couple episodes while I am out. So next week we have another fellow TikToker, and every time Kimberly comes on, I'm on a vacation. This is her second time coming, and I don't go on a vacation once or twice a year. The last time she came on, I was not here. I was on a vacation, but she's still coming back. So Amanda's going to host Kimberly Anderson again, and she is going to talk about, I'm going to be listening to it while I'm on vacation, but queerness and Mormonism and the religion of Mormonism. And you guys don't want to miss that. So that'll be coming next week. So thank you guys, and everybody take care. All right, stop.